Hello and good morning, everyone, and welcome to Endeavor's global marketing webinar themed Holy Cow, Marketing Has Changed. My name is Vera, and I will be your MC for today. For those who are not familiar with Endeavor, we are the leading global community of by for high impact entrepreneurs, basically, those who dream bigger, scale faster, and pay it forward. Driven by the belief that high impact entrepreneurs transform economies, Endeavor is on a mission to build thriving entrepreneurial ecosystems in emerging and undeserved markets all around the world. In essence, Endeavor creates a multiplier effect by inspiring high growth entrepreneurs to dream bigger, supporting and investing in them to scale faster, and also providing a platform to pay it forward. So they too can support the next generation of high impact entrepreneurs. So, given this opportunity today, I would like to also thank our sponsor, an Endeavor entrepreneur company from Turkey, Insider, which is a MarTech company that helps marketers deepen brand love with individualized customer experiences. With this, I would like to invite Charles, the VP at Insider, to share a few words.
Farah, thank you very much. And we're very grateful to be here. And everything that you said represents the ethos of what we are at Insider, where you have enabled us to be part of that journey to scale to over 1,200 clients globally across 26 offices and enabling the companies that we work with, some of the brands that we've mentioned there, Singapore Airlines, and many others, enable them to offer an omni-channel experience to their consumers. So Endeavor, thank you very much for helping us being part of this journey to scale to the 26 offices, and we look forward to what's being said today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Charles, and thank you, Insider, for always supporting Endeavor. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our panel of speakers today. As our moderator, we have Ranganathan Somanathan, co-founder of RSquared Global Ventures, who operates at the intersection of the startup ecosystem, marketing organizations, and the investor community by curating tech, data, content, and commerce for startups to scale globally. And for our speakers who are both Endeavor mentors, we have Prashant Kumar, founder of Entropia, a global marketing guru, and the author of the best selling marketing book, Made in Future, where he writes about his experience and knowledge as a next gen marketing provider. And we also have Flavia, the CMO of NotCo, a battle tested marketer who is leading NotCo, a Chilean unicorn to be the fastest growing plant based food tech company in Latin America. And the panel today will be discussing on our topic, Holy Cow, Marketing Has Changed, covering various aspects of marketing from where we are now, where we have come from, and where we will be most likely to go. So without further ado, I would like to pass the floor to Ranga.
Wow. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining from. It's a great panel we have here today, and it gives me great pleasure, to host Flavia and Prashant on a panel talking about a topic that is keeping us awake most of the time, trying to figure out how to engage and win customers as they are changing behaviors driven by rapid technological advances. So before we dive into the discussion, I'd love to introduce our panelists, and I'll start with Flavia. Hey, Flavia, it's good to have you here. Lovely to be talking to you. Flavia Buchmann is the Chief Marketing Officer of NotCo, a leading alternate protein brand that creates delicious food products such as milk, burger, and ice creams. For a vegetarian like me, this is a super cool category to be involved in. And the claim is they don't compromise on taste and texture, so that's awesome, even better. Most importantly, after a very successful career at Unilever and Coke, Flavia joined NotCo in 2019 to lead their global marketing organization with their branding efforts. She's based in New York with her husband and her family. Lovely to have you here, Flavia. Love to hear from you briefly about yourself before we bring in Prashant.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Endeavor lives close to my heart always. I love talking to entrepreneurs. I love to discuss business, and that's what brought me also to accept the challenge of moving to NotCo after coming from a more like traditional big CPG career. So that's a bit about myself. We can dive in. We can go deep in some or dive in some specific parts of it. But basically, that's the story of my life. I love the idea of having a problem that we don't know how to solve, and that's what I think startups are in general, right? We're looking for how do we do this business? What are the best practices for us to implement that? So that's the kind of environment that I want to be associated with. That's why it's a pleasure to mentor the entrepreneurs at Endeavor and be here tonight.
Awesome. Thanks, and lovely to have you here, Flavia.
Thank
Um, the next eminent panelist that we have the honor of is Prashant. Many of you would have met him and known him from your interactions in the region. Um, Prashant and I know each other for more than 2 decades. We've had formative years. And I've seen him at a very close quarters on how he has scaled and achieved a great success. One of the things that Prashant is known for is that he's always in a zone. He's in a zone to make a difference. He's in a zone to create a change, and he's always asking why, and the curiosity and the answers that he comes up with almost puts him in a space of rebel. Um, After running leading organizations, global network agencies across Asia, and being an eminent panelist on global creative awards, Prashant embarked on a startup journey to set up his own agency. And the theme of that agency was also made in future. Eventually, that led him to write his book, which has become a bestseller in such a short time. And I'm more than privileged to have the copy signed by Prashant with me. So I would love to hear from Prashant a bit more about himself, and from then we'll jump into our panel discussion. Prashant, over to you.
Hi, very good morning to you all. I am basically a very, very curious guy, and I need relentless intellectual and creative stimulation. That's my little weakness. Uh, I feel I'm an entrepreneur at heart. Uh, I believe that if ability to organize is the most fundamental differentiator of humans versus the animals, then entrepreneurs are right at the tip, at the leading edge, at the bleeding edge of that Darwinian quest for better and better search for survival and betterment of our species. Now, that may sound extremely biological, but that I believe is true. And if you look at how in the last 20 years, entrepreneurs, venture funds are sitting right at the heart of a cultural revolution, something that's less talked about. Uh, Clearly, we are all lining up even sharper behind the Darwinian quest to move from uh, humans as we exist right now to something much more evolved. Like I think Elon Musk said that we are just the bootloader software in the eventual search for a super species. And that may sound very far out, but at some level, that is correct. And entrepreneurs lead that search, that journey.
Amazing. Prashant, as we go through the conversation today, I guess I will ask you to step down from the Mars and come down to the Earth and talk to our human species in a way that we can comprehend and take learnings from. Thanks a lot for both of you again for being part of this conversation. Um, let's dive in and try to learn from both of you. And to the audience here, please feel free to feed in your questions, and we'll capture some of them as we go through the conversation. So, the question is to both of you, and Flavia, you can jump in first, right? You both have had long corporate careers before jumping into the startup space. Tell us about your formative years and values that you imbibed growing up in your respective hometowns, and those values that give you anchor today as you deal with the dynamism of the startup space. So, Flavia, let's hear from you.
Let's go. I think I'm gonna be going back to a lot of those formative years during tonight or this morning for you. Um, I'm very appreciative to that. So normally when we go from a big corporation to a startup, the most common speech is to talk about the bad things of a big corporation, right? Slow, high politics, and not very much in touch with the changes in the markets. Uh, all of that is true for a reason. We can touch base on that too. Um, but this idea of formative years, I think the way you put the question are super important. I started, well, I worked before that, but let's leave that in the past, like 20 something years ago. But when I started at Unilever was the first time that I really understood the science of marketing. And I would say that more than 50% of what I am now as a professional, even like 25 years after that, uh, it is based on what I learned there. First of all, every time I talk about marketing, that I tend to go beyond branding and communications and really think about all the P's or however you want to put theory around it. Um, I will give another ways to think about that too later. But however you think about marketing and strategy, it goes beyond communication, right? It talks about what are your strategies to gain consumers, how do you read the market. All of that was very well structured in the beginning of my career at Unilever. Then at Coca-Cola, I learned a lot about pricing, about branding. But those companies, what they have is a very frameworked in a very good way, frameworked way to think about that. And this whole idea that we talk a lot about that freedom within a framework,
Mm-hmm.
or like the fact that discipline is freedom. There are many ways for you to talk about that. I think more you know the theory and the frameworks, more you feel comfortable in innovating. It's a pity that many times in big corporations we don't use that framework to innovate because of many other reasons. But when you do this mix, when you take these formative years to a more startup adventures experience, you see the perfect combination because you do know what are the things that you need to think about, and you can think about those things differently. Um, so those are, I mean, if I need to say a couple of things that I take to life, that I took to my entrepreneur side as well, are the importance of listening to consumers, but really understanding what they have to say. One thing that I will be coming back tonight, the importance of devising a strategy. And I'm also a big fan of the idea of the best strategies to do things, absolutely. But thinking about things and thinking and doing, of course, is the perfect combination. And the value of like thinking about what do you want to accomplish from the objective to strategy, it's something that I never forget. So that's something that I think helps a lot when I have like bigger challenge, when we are setting up a company. It's a way bigger challenge that you can ever have in a big company, even being, of course, a bigger company.
Amazing. I would like to come back later to you on doing versus thinking, and the skew that one sees in a large corporate versus a startup, which is more action oriented and getting things accomplished oriented. So we'll come back to that, Flavia. Let's just quickly hear from Prashant about his formative days and the values that he imbibed from there that led him to be the successful entrepreneur and a best-selling author.
So, well, let me talk about three key influences in that regard. I studied in an army school for 7 years in an all boys boarding school. It taught me tremendous tenacity. It gave me tremendous emotional and mental bandwidth, and it gave me that warrior attitude. So when we talk about fight and fright, my natural instinct is always to fight back. So that was uh, my school, and then I came to St. Stephen's College in Delhi. uh, Now Stevens has a very distinct intellectual core. I mean, there is a certain rebellious streak, walking down the corridor. Underdogs are always celebrated. In 70s, a lot of Stephanians left the college and became underground guerrillas. Even today, there's a Stephanian school of literature that exists, and you will see that it tends to be distinctly left to the center, if not extreme left anymore. So I think Stevens helped me get in a closer touch with my intellectual side, made me extremely curious about learning new things and discovering the other side and finding its relevance. And then I went to MICA, the top advertising school in India, because I wanted to do something different. And I think MICA gave me imagination, the centrality of imagination, creativity, looking for the lateral order of things, looking for the unseen as a key to the unpredictability of the future. So if you bring together the three educational experiences I had, which is a warrior's attitude, uh, the intellect from St. Stephen's, and the imagination from Micah, I think that sort of is the triad on which I would imagine my career has been erected on.
Amazing. There is a folklore, Prashant, and you can probably demystify it here, that you were selected in one of those Ivy League Indian colleges, and then you defied those admissions to go and take a admission in the St. Stephen's. Tell us if that is true, and what did you have to overcome in your personal level with your parents to actually navigate that?
No, you make the ultimately we are all made of the choices that we have made over the course of our lives, right? The validations, the pains. So little things can bring a new inflection point in your long term life and career. So it was one of those moments, and now you can just smile at that.
Awesome.
Retrospect.
I want to come back to Flavia about formative years. Flavia, you spoke a lot about your corporate formative years. Do you have anything to layer on from your growing up space? I mean, Prashant has grown up in an emerging market environment. You've grown up in an emerging market environment, and both of you are in operating and impacting the first world businesses. I would love to hear from you from a personal perspective. What challenges that you went through that kind of sharpened your core?
Yeah. Oh, that's deep. I heard Prashant talking about his life, and I said, "Oh, I went straight to my formative as an executive, my formative years." Um, so going deeper now, what are the values that I bring from my family and from growing up? Of course, I mean when we are, and I think this audience knows there. When we are born in a new country, in a country that's still developing, even if it's not socially economic, but it's still like developing their own traditions, and you learn a lot about the constant change and need to adapt. So I think that's something that probably we all share, and of course made a lot of what I am as a professional as well. But mostly one thing that is more particular to myself, I started working when I was 14 years old, and I really love it. And I think I told that in another Endeavor event. I was talking a lot about my whole career under this perspective of starting working so early in my life and really liking and taking that from life, this idea of solving business problems and solving challenges as something that was intellectually motivating for me. I think Prashant mentioned too, like at the beginning, that you are a person that is um, not only challenged but like excited by creative stimuli. I feel the same, and I need this idea, and that's a lot of why I moved to a startup. A lot of like I want to be challenged with things that I don't know. That's something that I definitely brought from my early days, maybe from how I was raised and the kind of schools that I've been to. That's definitely something that I bring with me.
Brilliant. And then that leads me to the question, right? You guys had such a successful corporate career going, and fame, power, position, everything was on your side. What were you thinking when you left Coca-Cola to join Not Company? And Prashant, likewise, what were you thinking when you moved from leading one of the top network agencies to go and set up your own business? Either of, I mean, Prashant, you can go first, and then Flavia can layer from there.
So I'll be short. Midlife crisis. I had been with IPG for 13 years, and for the last 4 years, I had been running IPG Media Brands as the CEO for Asia. So I had two choices when I turned 40. Either I spend another 5 years, 10 years, maybe my entire life career with in the traditional mold, or I do something that's tough enough, daring enough, uh, to be stimulating and be fun. And that is where I felt, hey, let's do this. And in '99, I started a .com company as well, which we had to fold up after 9 months because of the .com bubble burst. So it was always there somewhere inside me. Eventually, it was the search for doing something worthwhile. We all have only one life after all.
Awesome. Flavia, I'd love to hear from
Yeah,
you.
I think we are all kind of a cliche. It was a lot about middle age crisis too. Um, a couple of things that normally are part of this decision of changing dramatically the kind of work you do, still in the same industry in my case, and of course marketing is still like changing dramatically the kind of problems that I was dealing with every day. One thing that it was not, and I like to mention that a lot of people that give up big companies for a startup or for any other life, they talk a lot about politics and how hard it is to navigate. Honestly, that was not my drive. One, because I do like the idea of influencing and discussing ideas. And second, I never had the illusion, and I think it's important to be said, at least my perspective is that I don't think those things are better or worse in a startup or in a smaller company. It's very much part of this associative, communal thing that we humans have. So the politics, the influence, then having to discuss ideas and maybe not to have it your own way, I don't think it's different. And I didn't think that when I left Coke that I was going to like a simpler environment. What drove me were two things. One, I really wanted to have the empty canvas, and I wanted to learn faster. I was feeling that, of course, I mean, don't take me wrong. It would be arrogant to say that, oh, I knew everything about Coca-Cola. I didn't have anything to learn. Of course, I still had it. But I had a feeling that 80% of my job was about things that I had done before, that I knew how to do it. And I wanted to be challenged with the idea of how do we set up a new country? Like I had been working with market for 20 years. I was a global director. I learned a lot, especially because I was a global director for Sprite. So my biggest markets were USA that I knew, China, India, Pakistan, countries that I mean the category was developing there. Not only I didn't know the countries much, I'm very glad to have traveled a lot in that moment as well, but also it was almost like a startup. It's no, I shouldn't say that, but like we were developing a category. Like Sprite in India is giant; it's the biggest consumer goods brand, but the category is small. So you're more or less still introducing the idea of drinking soda. So that was a lot of learning. But there would be a long, long time that I didn't feel this idea of, oh, I've never done that before. At NotCo, we have 6 markets. When I joined, 6 markets where we have operations. We are selling in 11 markets. So I was involved in like, how do we scale up a exporting model? I had never done that in my life. How do we assemble a team to work in 6 different countries? I had never done that. And that's what I was looking for. And the second thing is that I wanted to really like use more of my workforce and my brain to something that I wanted to see grow in the world. So I'm also a vegetarian. I had been vegetarian before. So for me, it was the perfect intersection of like doing something that I wanted to see growing in the world.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Prashant, tell us about what were you thinking in terms of, when you moved from IPG into Entropia and set up your own business, what were some of the things that you did differently, and layer it in the context of taking the marketing science, brand building, and tell us from that perspective of what were the things that you had to do, continue doing, or do, and what are the things that you needed to do differently to actually build the business?
So clearly, the fact that data and technology had disrupted the whole marketing services industry, marketing indeed in itself, in very fundamental ways, was something that was understood by people in general. However, what I felt is that a lot of efforts that were being made to solve that problem were more like band-aiding the past into the future. And I was a strong believer that what was needed really is to reconceive marketing and how marketing services as an ecosystem must work from a white sheet. And that was the vision with which we started Entropia. And if you think about how we organized for it, and I mean, of course, there is offerings and all those. So we had uh, first we broke the structure itself, because we realized that you cannot create future into the containers of the past. All right. So we decided to do away with the department approach that typical ad holding companies tend to have in their agencies. Uh, Basically, we organized the whole company as a set of T teams. What I mean by T teams is you every team had a every business unit had a specialism, but they were also general custodians of clients. All right. So, for instance, let's say we had four key business units, which is communication, CX, commerce, and consulting. So there were four different doors, but there was one house. So depending on what's priority for a client, that particular unit will take lead. But then everybody else, all the other competencies across the organization will network together to support that team. And we worked out everything, the incentives, the KPIs, the reporting structures, in order to be able to deliver on that. So the whole company was organized like a very, very fluid network of the entire gamut of competencies that today's marketing requires. From I mean, when we talk about CX, we weren't just doing CRM or MarTech or UX UI and so on. We also now have the largest metaverse studio in Southeast Asia. So that was, I think, structurally a big difference. uh, there was also, I think, people make all the difference, right? So we also, if you look at the leadership, it was all made of whole brain hybrid people. So we decided that we do not need people defined by online or offline. We need leaders who can navigate both worlds, are truly hybrid with equal facility. And we needed leaders who are genuinely whole brain. They can think about the world of insights and ideas, as well as they can think about the world of quantitative modeling and big data and so on. So now that kind of leadership is not common, but over the years we had groomed a lineup which we felt could be that. So I think uh, the type of leadership supported by the right structure and all enveloped with the right culture, uh, I think would be probably the most important reason why this model worked. And that is
So
how I believe marketing of the future can be conceived as well. The moment you start drawing artificial organizational lines between the right brain and the left brain, the digital and the analog. I mean, somebody asked me in an interview, I think Campaign Asia asked me a few days back, so should will the role of CMO be split into chief data officer and chief digital officer and chief design officer and chief metaverse officer and all that? I said, hello, the most important job of a CMO today is to continuously look out for untapped areas of customer value. So if customer value has moved into a particular space which is new, who else but the CMO to embrace it first, learn about it, and see how to strategically integrate it into the mainstream of the organization? The moment you niche out that job, create a tiny silo in some corner who is doing that, it can never be a truly integrated into the, you cannot embrace that then as an organization, right? So yeah, sorry, Flavia.
no, that was a very good context of how people do talk about silos even now. One of the big questions that even large corporates are struggling with, and is even organizing data. Forget people on how data flows into the organization, and they're getting a unified view. Flavia, taking what Prashant said and layering it with your own insights, he spoke about people, he spoke about process, which are critical, and also culture that comes into play to actually create a made in future organization. So, Flavia, tell us a bit about how you have actually bought learnings from large corporates and build fresh frameworks as you've deployed into NotCo.
So let me talk about a couple of hows. And one thing that I keep repeating, I super agree with what Prashant was saying. This like artificial creation, even like leads to like not very bright ideas of when I hear traditional media, like what is the non-traditional media? Digital media, like online media. So this artificial separation of traditional versus new, it's something that I try to break a lot inside NotCo. So a couple of I love the idea. One thing that I always say is that every time, like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when A/B testing was something that would revolutionize marketing or media, I like to tell the story that like many years ago, where we were still, well, here in US people still do that, but when we were like sending mail to consumers with offers, this market is big here in US. I mean, you open your mailbox, you're gonna see a lot of offers, so must be working still. But 20 years ago, when I was still doing that for a media company in Brazil, we used to send different mails to different regions and then measure the results. So that is an A/B test. So this whole idea of like understanding that most likely the thoughts are not new. The way you approach that, the way you design your experiments, that's what can be reinvented. So the way I try to use that at NotCo is that everything that we know that didn't work in big corporations, like looking too much into your own self and thinking that you are creating everything, all the theories of marketing, all the theories on branding and business, that you are doing that by yourself. Like inside NotCo, we try to talk way more with partners, competitors, agencies, people on the network that we want to bring more thinking inside the house. I try to debunk, it's not always possible, but debunk some ideas of corporate organization like global versus local, that I think it's also an artificial split happens and is in our way, especially if you're trying to create global companies. We ended up duplicating a lot of resources with this whole idea of like we cannot share. I need to have something that is hyper local. That's another thing that I try to debunk as well. I think those are like a couple of important things and they pass by people, culture, the way we approach media, the process that we have. Let's try to do always like to be open and transparent on experimenting. I would say that.
Before we jump into how marketing has changed, we've already started talking about some elements of it. I would like to actually close the first section by asking what are the things that big organizations do well that we can actually take forward to an agile startup mindset and a startup company. There are audiences today who are also from large corporates as well as startups. So I want these lessons to be there for even individuals who are working in large corporates. How do they change their behaviors? What successes that they take from their existing companies and continue? And what do they actually need to evolve? Can you layer a couple of thoughts on that, please?
I can. Couple of things that I mentioned some in the beginning, right? I think they respect, they might lose touch with one-on-one contact with consumer, but the respect for consumer insights and really reading the market instead of like looking for product market fits. Start by the fit and not by the product, like really understanding what are the white spaces, what is happening with the market. There are a couple of bad things to be said about that too, on how this data is delayed in most of the big corporations. But the idea or the good intention on looking into a lot of data, looking for insights, and that's how we innovate instead of the other way around, like having only a vision and trying to see to whom should I sell that. That's something that it probably is a good mix to understand with another side of the story, which is when I have a breakthrough in technology, how do I find a market for that? But looking on the other side and really understanding the markets, it's something that they do well. Um, the other thing is clarity on strategic priorities. Some companies do better than others, of course, but you do have of everything is exaggerated from one side or the other. So we do have again a bad side too, but of a good thing in a big corporation, which is this is the agenda that is hyped right now. So you know that inside your corporation, like this is the year we're talking about sustainability, or this is the year that we need to reinvent media. I mean, we can talk bad things about that, but it's also a reflex of very clear like priorities for the cycle. That is something that when we are doing too much, you talk to different people inside of the same company, even being a smaller company, and they might be working with different priorities. That's something that we can definitely import. Even the frameworks. Are we gonna use like jobs to be done? Are we gonna use must be battle? But how can we have like three things that everybody in the company know that that's what we're gonna accomplish for this next cycle? That's something good that we can import too.
I can totally relate to that, Flavia. Having worked on companies like Coca-Cola, P&G, from the agency side, you always have priorities and cascading choices. If you have more budgets, what is the upward focus? If you have less budgets, what is the downward focus? And it's very clear, so nobody is able to deviate from that. That, of course, puts limits on opportunities, but also ensures that there is focus and no depletion of efforts. I'd like to ask Prashant a question on the same, right? Prashant,
Yes. So, if you look at the largest accomplishment of big corporations, it is the fact that they are able to operate across, hundreds of thousands of employees across 100 different countries, and still can sustain their success decade after decade, sometimes more than 100, 200 years, right? That is scalability without losing their advantage is the biggest success. Now, if now you when you go back to a startup in the beginning has a leader or a founding team, let's say a founder, and a hypothesis, right? A hypothetical model of why they will win, right? How they will disrupt. And then as the customer market discovery happens, that model sort of has a little bit more tangibility and so on. But as I have been myself mentoring a lot of scale ups, the biggest challenge comes in how do you scale, right? How do you take the founder's persona and convert it into culture, right? How do you extend his personality into a large scalable culture by instituting the right rituals, right cultural practices? By Gerd Hofstede, the famous organizational behavior guru, talks about culture as three components: personified state, objectified state, and institutionalized state. How do you extend a person into a culture, into an institution? And then, so that's the founder or founding team thing. The second thing is, of course, the hypothetical model, which is now not that hypothetical anymore, right? Now you want to scale up that model. How do you take the competencies, the approaches that truly differentiate and that are truly scalable, and build those processes, those workflows, those structures, those internal institutions that can help it scale year after year, country after country, and so on. So I think that is probably the single biggest area, and it's no small challenge, because I think most startups fail while doing that. Different from animals, which is how do you organize at scale, right? So
that's again very interesting view on how do you take a founder's personality and institutionalize it into an organizational culture and keep the theme and the inspiration going through the organization. I would like to actually now pivot into specifics of marketing. And we all have heard a dime a dozen time ad nauseum that data is the new oil. Data is coming at us at a much faster speed, and it is also coming to us with clear directions. And there is a lot of conversation about how technology is disrupting audience behavior. With so many things happening and happening fast, how has marketing changed? And what has changed, and how have the companies coped with it in your perspective? Prashant, do you want to go first?
Sure. I think marketing and business can't be that far apart, right? Marketing is where business meets people, and all business ultimately, the reason to be is for the people, right? Uh, I mean, customer value creation is the only true competency you really develop as an organization, directly or indirectly. So I believe that the market forces that determine the health of an organization, its risk profile, its ability to create long-term sustainable margin advantage, historically has been determined according to, say, for example, Michael Porter would define it as the five forces model, where the competitive forces may come from, right? I would like to believe that if you look at all the disruptions that have happened in the last 20 years, it is really, really difficult to imagine that anybody could be studying Porter's five forces model and be able to anticipate that. There was no way taxi industry would have imagined a mix and match application will squeeze out all the margins from the industry and create a whole new set of inventory in the market. Or restaurant industry would have imagined, the F&B industry, that the lion's share of the margin in the ecosystem will be taken by the some apps, right? So clearly, I believe that businesses and hence marketing need to be reconceived around four key competencies: UX power, network power, which is basically social graph, network power, data power, and brand power. And there is, of course, interplay between these four. But I believe that all businesses today, especially the consumer facing businesses, but even the non, I mean, Alibaba's success proves the power of network power, even on the B2B front, right? So every business needs to go back to its value chain, different elements of its value chain, and the customer facing needs state ecosystem in which it operates, and really relook from a white sheet. How can the competencies and the way they organize and the way they define their assets be reorganized around these four forces: UX power, data power, network power, and brand power? If you look at all the great iconic companies of our times, the new age companies, they are all organized around these competencies, and that is what gives them differentiation in the market. I mean, Apple doesn't have a car today, Apple doesn't have a VR headset today, but it already has a captive consumer base for that. And the only justification is not that in the world of 80s and 90s there is any connection between a car and a mobile phone. The only justification is that the real leverage, the real competency, the real margin advantage comes from these four powers, rather than the factories you may have or the number of people who can work the steel lathe machines, you know.
Prashant, that's an amazing construct that you've given. I will come back to you in a bit, but let's hear from Flavia about her views on um, what's the disruption and how it's impacted marketing.
All right, I'll try. I saw some comments here. So my key points when I think about how different is market, how has market changed from then, whatever is then, and now. I like to do the parallel. I think honestly the most important thing is how marketing fundamentals hasn't changed, and because of a lot of what Prashant has said. I mean, you cannot foresee or forecast what is happening, but it could never. Like all the innovation comes from visions that most likely you didn't foresee. Everybody wants to look back and say that they saw whatever was coming, but of course, it's not. Innovation is always happening. There's one true thing that I think, and I mentioned a couple, but there's one true thing one true change. What is to do marketing now versus what it was to do like 20 years ago, and maybe we're on the verge of seeing another change now, which is the speed that you can have information and the speed that you can implement things. I remember I was doing exactly about this topic. I did a full presentation, and this has a lot of implications, but everything comes from that. Like when I started working, even if you forget the whole idea of mailing, when your main channel was a TV, there were a lot of implications. Not only that you could not have real time information, but also you were spending upfront I don't know, let's say in a small, we can spend all any kind of amounts. But let's say that we're gonna be doing a one flight of $10 million, and you're gonna be spending almost $1 million to produce that TV commercial. You were also spending 200,000 K to test it before, because you couldn't change that in flight. So of course, all the idea of like how I'm gonna test, how I'm gonna be sure, and even this idea of like thinking more before you're doing was also driven by the fact that once you press play, it was on air for 3 months. We could not change it. You would not know if it's working or not. Of course, I don't have to explain how is it different now. Even if you do TV, by the way, even if you do more traditional channels, they also accommodate way more like real-time changes as well.
Mhm.
So of course it doesn't make change. It doesn't make sense also for you to test in the way that you were doing before. So you can spend less money. You could test in a small online group. You can like air it and see what happens in a smaller audience online too. That's a fundamental change, I would say. All the and the implications of that too. All the others is more the balance of thinking that the fundamentals didn't change, but they are all informed by the fact that we have data fast. And you mentioned, Ranga, the idea of like data is informing what we do. I mean, or like giving the solution. You said something around that I would like to comment on, because I think the amount of data that we have is unprecedented. Also, the amount of lacking of information coming from that data is unprecedented, because we forgot to think, and something that startups had really well like 10 years ago, which was the idea of like use data to confirm your hypothesis. Now we are going more to like using data to replace your hypothesis. And you are like asking the data to do your strategy. Data is an input for your strategy. You look into that and you think, crossing that with my capabilities, with my vision of what I want to do. And that's not different from how it was always. We are seeing now even going back to more traditional under brackets media too, because this whole idea of everything's going to be inexpensive forever online, for me it was kind of obvious. I'm doing the same thing that I said everybody's doing, like looking back and saying that I saw that, but it's obvious that like it was always media, it was always channel. So we need to be looking for what is the next one, and creativity and strategy and using the data for you to get informed and take a decision was always important. It's going to be always important. So that's one thing that I would say more than what is changed is like, don't forget that you are the marketing readers, not only the marketeers, but that's the job of the CEO. That's the job of the CGO. You have to generate growth. So you're looking to that. You have way more access to data. But what are the questions that you are doing? And what are decisions that you want to take with that? And that's something that didn't change. And I think it's still very important. Just one more thing that I think it's, I see a comment about branding and how different it is from, on how apart it is from sales. There's one common expression too that we say inside marketing, like there's the brand value and the brand love side of it, right? One is how do I generate sales, how I do generate demands, how I do conversion, and the other thing is how do I generate brand love. Just by saying that, we forget one important thing. Why do I generate brand love? The only reason why Coca-Cola was built, is still building their brand love, is because Coca-Cola is more expensive than Pepsi, and is more expensive than any other brand. Is to command a higher price. The only reason why every one of us do brand love is to sell more or more expensive or to more people or to more time. So they are integral part of the same thing. They are the same story. We can never forget that. If you separate that too much inside the organization too, this get lost. You're gonna end up with a lot of marketeers doing beautiful events, not connected with your targets in terms of how many people do I need to reach. I'm looking for repeat buyers, or I'm looking for bigger awareness for a brand that is unknown. This needs to be really well like understood as part of the same funnel, of the same path to conversion.
Yeah.
Prashant.
So just to add to Flavia, I think she made a beautiful point about managing change becoming a very important task of a marketer. So in the book, I have tried to give it a little shape and spoken about, I believe that every marketing leader and those working in the ecosystem, because they are dealing with the same kind of change, must go through a basic certification in how venture capital funds operate. Because eventually, in these rapidly changing times, they are working with a portfolio of opportunities and risks. That is what ultimately what they do has become. All right, because things are changing very fast. So how do they cultivate that VC attitude in their head, in their operating style, and are able to manage the today, tomorrow, and day after in a very balanced and judicious way? So that, because there is a very thin line between a martyr and a game changer. So that venture marketer is the new species of marketer. All right,
And
that inclination, the attitude, the mindset. Because unfortunately, especially in large established corporations, we see very little appetite for risk at a quarterly basis, because they are. So it is now left to marketing leaders who are in touch with the ground, yet think strategy, to behave like a venture marketer.
And with the one of the big themes that comes in change is speed and quick access to information, and that could lead to a paralysis, because if you don't know what you're trying to answer, and you know that you kind of get into a over analysis and a paralysis space. And therefore, what you guys are saying is, the fundamentals of marketing, go back to it, think of it as, how are you creating customer value, which is one of the fundamental purposes of a marketing organization or a business. You keep that as one of the fundamentals that does not change, but layer it with the ability to experiment, ability to do things which are creating untapped opportunities. And you talk about, Prashant, the ability to take risks and think of a venture marketer mindset. A lot of times, the organization does not reward an individual for taking risks, but more for flawless execution. So, as an individual who's listening to us today, how can they straddle the organization need of stability and predictability, and their personal ambition to create an impact through agility and taking a risk? How do you straddle this? What tips do you give at an individual level?
So when it comes to winning over the people, not being in sync with the times is the greatest risk you have. So it's high time that organizations need to start recognizing the opportunity loss as an item. Right. So we look at the credit side of customer value that you create if you attain, if you invest in a certain way. But there is a deficit side when you don't in certain other ways. So, but if you look at how venture capitalists operate, the whole attitude is to manage risks, right? You have different portfolio of opportunities and risks, and you try to manage some slightly less risky ones with some more risky ones, and so on. In Coca-Cola, we used to talk about 70-20-10 approach, which I'm guessing Flavia has heard about that as well. I think these are some very simple rules that remain timeless in a certain way. Sorry.
Prashant,
Yes,
Flavia, you want to weigh in on that?
No, I'd love to. And if you allow me, I'll make a little bit of a mess here. I'm seeing other comments too. So I'm going to try to skew to that, because I think it's a good jump for us to do. 7-20-10 approach. I don't know if everybody's, there are a lot of systems that mention 7-20-10. I think, Prashant, you're referring to the idea of innovation versus disruptive versus more known, right? So in everything at Coca-Cola and a couple of organizations use this idea of course, you have to use 70% of your resources. Might be 75, might be 60 if you are more like, if you have more appetite to risk, but around 70% of your resource needs to be in something that are proven and you know that it's going to work. Harder in a startup that maybe you don't know what it's going to work. But try to be in something that, I mean, it has been proven by other companies that you know that is your bread and butter. 20% you need to keep trying to find scale for something that you know might work, and 10% is more disruptive. So you're gonna bet on something that might not work. If it works, it's amazing, and if it doesn't work, you only sacrifice 10% of your budget. So I'm connecting that to what we were saying before, and on and how do we remain like relevant when things are changing so fast. I think one very important thing is to understand what is relevant to your audience. And that's something that I would do as a watch out for startups. I'm the most boring person inside of NotCo saying that we are not talking about our technology. And I'm sure that most of you can relate with something similar, can do a parallel in your companies. It's very common for marketeers, but also to founders, that we fall in love with what we have to offer and everything that is amazing about our company, our culture, our technology. What does it matter for consumers? For you, who is your final consumer, by the way, and what are their pains, and how do I give a straightforward message on how do I solve that? That's what is relevant to them. It's very common to see a lot of communications and ideas of we talk too much about being a startup and how cool it is, on how this company is worried about the environment, or how the technology, in the case of NotCo, it's what makes it possible for us to create amazing products. I'll give my example. When consumers thinking about food, they want amazing taste and texture. Especially when they go plant-based, the reason for them to reject is that I tried and it's meh. Uh, I mean, every time when I approve anything, any title, any copy, any visual identity, it's like it's taste first. And sometimes I know that some people on my team are like, no, but I like this side of the business, but we need to be very consistent on what is relevant to your consumers. Last but not least, I saw some comments here about how hard it is for you to put content forward since you're competing with like an abundance of content, and also competing with the whole media channels. When you say the algorithm, we need to say the name. Those are the media channels. Those are the media companies. Of course, it's gonna be harder and harder for you to push content forward. And I think it is something that I'll be polemic here, I guess. I see happening in startup the kind of like slow down that happened in the big companies, like to see the movement and to let it go. Content markets, it's over. The idea of free content, like of course I'm saying is content is still relevant. Content is what we all consume, right? In our lives, we see content. But this idea that we had, and it was great if you could navigate that in 2008, that if I do a great content, it's gonna go viral and I'm gonna become famous without putting media money behind it. I know that we are gonna agree with me that it doesn't exist anymore, but in our heart, we are still trying. We still have an idea that if we do great content, somebody's gonna pick it up. We are, or at least even if we don't believe in that and we are certain of that, we are still creating content like it would happen. You need to have a distribution strategy. That's what the content creators that are really big, they have. Of course, easier said than done, but I would say shift your creative power to media strategy. And even don't call it media strategy if you don't want to, but to distribution strategy. How are you gonna be seen? Having a great content is paramount. You have to, but it's not gonna work by itself. So all the things that we used to put the creative work behind, like I'm gonna do a different content, and that's what is gonna catch attention. I need to think about how I'm gonna do a different media strategy. And one thing that I would say is that try to demolish this idea of like traditional and new media. Everything is there, and pretty much eight in every 10 mentorship that I do, I hear even like vertical digital native companies asking me, well, digital marketing for me, I'm not being able to scale it anymore. It's becoming super expensive. I'm on my limits. What are other media channels that I need to try? Should I try traditional like it was a thing? Should I try? I'm tempted to do some billboards. Should I do that? And I would say definitely yes. Like forget about what is the name of this channel. As a joke too, one day I got an email. We got a lot of spams of company trying to offer their service, and there is one that was very simple, nothing sophisticated, but it had a picture and said, "Have you thought about advertising on Fortune cookies?" And I was like, "No, I haven't." And man, Fortune cookies are branded now. Like these marketeers, they know no bounder. But after thinking about that, I was like, I haven't. I mean, I don't know anything about their reach and if it's a good moment or not. I didn't look for it. So honestly, I didn't advertise on Fortune Cookie. Maybe I should. But I've been talking more and more about this example internally with my team and
Mhm.
externally too. Like everything is a media. You need to be creative on what you want to do and more important, where people are gonna see your content. It's not about the content anymore. It's about how you're gonna make how I'm gonna be seen.
I want to take you into a next point here, Flavia. You run an in-house organization which is called Not Agency, and you talk something that Prashant touched upon earlier in the context of process and culture. Can you quickly touch upon that? And also, Prashant, leading from there, I would like you to touch upon your perspective. You said you have a metaverse organization within the company. And there's a question from Sally who's talking about the role of metaverse in the next few years. Flavia, if you can just touch upon your in-house NotCo agency, not agency, and then Prashant, you can build from there on the metaverse. That'd be pretty cool.
All right. I'll say a couple of things about the Not Agency. It's a experiments also that we're doing. In-house models are not new, but I think in general, in-house agents are just agencies that you pay in a different way. They become like large organizations. You hire the best in the market, and they bring the good and the bad of traditional agents. Traditional that I try to avoid this word, but I ended up talking anyway. The model of the agents normally they bring the same problems too. You have a client that is always complaining about the outcome, but also doesn't put enough time in like doing the briefing and thinking about strategy and doing the work. Um, and also the clients, even being internal clients, fail to recognize complexity. That's something that I think we need to address too. Business problems are complex. There's no easy solution for that. So like we need to try and try again and do in different ways. So one way that we are trying to at NotCo, we start to build like a shared service that we call the Not Agency. It's a very small team, like 5 people, because we don't want to replace agencies. We need creative power, so we need to work with the best in the markets as well. Uh, but I didn't want NotCo to be one of those clients that just brief the agents and wait for a miracle. We need to have like skin in the game. We need to get your hands dirty. You need to be working together. Even internally, that is a challenge. Like I said before, even like not having a full in-house agency um, is still a challenge. Like many times I'm talking to the whole team, like that's not how we brief. We are just like delegating the problem and not strategizing together and thinking about that together. But the intent is to be more flexible to work with different models. So if you need something fast, like we're gonna do a pitch for a partnership in 2 days, literally. It's something that you cannot ask an agent to do that. So internally, we just do the initial briefing, initial ideas, and we can pitch. If you're gonna work with a big relaunch, we can work with external agents, but also having our team to discuss ideas. If you want to do like a big strategy exercise, we can invite a couple of people to collaborate and do a sprint. So the idea is to work with different models. Another way also to try to use the best of the old or traditional models, but be more flexible with that.
Awesome. So two things that I take from there is ability to better integrate with the service partners and not just push the problem out. And second is try and experiment multiple solutions with your own not agency ecosystem. That's pretty cool. Prashant, can you, Flavia touched upon multiple things, also commented on some of the points that the audience has raised. Take us a little bit more in the era of metaverse and how that is changing marketing and how brands need to prepare for that.
So let me talk in two parts. Number one, the big picture, and number two, some very specific examples. So the big picture is that you see more and more of our living is mediated today compared to situated, right? And especially the pandemic has just increased that part. Now, the dominant format of that living is video. And if you think about video, it's a 125 years old format. I genuinely believe that metaverse is a vague term, AR, VR, MR, and holograms, and a whole lot of these technologies. Metaverse is the format of living for next 100 years. So that is the big picture that we must, and there are many reasons for that. The efficiency reason, the immersion reason, the optimization and simulation, and so on. How it allows us to make the complexity of living more simple. But let us come to what we are doing today. I think that will give you something that you can feel in your fingers. So there is a whole lot of communication that we are doing with some of these technologies. So, for instance, just to give you an example, for one of the big Pepsi campaigns last year, we converted the packaging into a concert stage. So the moment you put your phone against the bottle, the actual Pepsi bottle, it triggers a link, and then the moment you press on it, web AR is activated, and you actually can see a concert by one of the biggest celebrities in Malaysia happening on the bottle surface. All right, so it turns the bottle into a concert stage, the PepsiCo AR concert. A hugely successful campaign. It was just a little fun thing that teenagers and young adults could do, and celebrated around the world for the success it gave Pepsi, where they won 5%, 5.2 or 3% extra shares because of that. Then similarly, a whole lot of, so these are the communication applications, but there are a whole lot of deeper applications. Like, for instance, BMW showroom, which is enabled by AR and VR, so that you could actually experience the car in a virtual showroom, and you could do various things around it. You could interact with the salespeople and so on. Something that we are now discussing at a much larger scale around the world. There is for Telecom Malaysia, their B2B marketing, the whole physical paper-based brochure were created in a fantastic XR experience, which brought the whole technology, because they are selling cloud solutions and 5G solutions and all. It suddenly gives the service they are selling a whole new dimension, because you speak in the language that you actually want your clients to adopt. So again, very successful. For one of the other companies here, they had a 125-year-old museum, which is they were extremely proud of, and we overlaid an augmented reality information layer over it, as well as we associated a series of VR experiences where they could experience it in the extended reality space. So there are a whole lot of these things that we are doing. There's a lot of ambitious projects that are slightly confidential, so we'll not talk about that. But if you look around, I mean, Ariana Grande, Fortnite, 28 million attendees for that event. I have been watching one show championship, sorry, the boxing championship quite frequently, and it seems to be one way brands could take their activation and events into the virtual reality space. Louis Vuitton, Balenciaga, they launched their latest range last year into the virtual reality space. Gucci has created a Gucci garden inside Roblox. So there are a whole lot of these marketing experiences being conceived that take the whole brand interaction to a very different level of immersion. There are also services and products being offered there. So, for instance, there are banks who have opened their branches inside the metaverse, like so Fortnite and all, where you can actually interact with the relationship manager and get information and access and highly personalized information, because let's not forget that it's data-driven experience. So if an avatar from a bank is talking to you, the person is able to access your personal information and offer you hyper relevant advice. So the possibilities, frankly, are endless, and I think we are only beginning to see how far it can go. In the eventual world, we will have every high context physical reality overlaid with an augmented extension.
Awesome.
And
Prashant, I mean, this topic is so deep and wide. You say the metaverse format is going to be there for the next 100 years, that we all have to start our journey now. We can go deeper and deeper. There are a few other questions from the floor that I would like to place it in front of you guys. One of the big themes that seems to be coming is inflationary environment and recessionary environments, and having to cope with the changes that are happening in marketing. What guidance do you have for the audience when you're dealing with recession, you're dealing with inflationary trends? What do you do as you create value for customers?
Look for customer value where it's not obvious, because ultimately what we are saying is when times are tough, consumers become more conscious about the trade-off between price and value. The sensitivity is higher. Now, there are two ways to go about it. Either you optimize your way through versus your competition and try to get that extra little edge over them in terms of the value price trade-off, or this is the time to take a helicopter view of things and be able to unlock the customer value opportunities that have not been accessed yet. And I think if you read the book, there are so many cues on that. What could be the blue ocean of customer value enabled by the new data-driven experiences? Sorry, Flavia, you'd like.
No, I think that's great, and of course that's the topic of the season, right? Welcome to the end of the world again. We're gonna be talking a lot about this, and so one thing that I think this joke of like welcome again to the end of the world is already the first thing that I like to say. We've been through that, so it's not every time we even the media, the way we talk to each other, we ended up like putting more pressure on something that, I mean, one thing that we do well is to navigate crisis. So it's gonna be all right. What I think we should do right now, a couple of things. One, definitely this idea of you need to. There was an interesting story. I was talking to I cannot quote, but it was a big rank investor. We were in a very small group, transparent conversation of three people, and like approaching ideas like, is that a moment to completely freeze awareness and reach investment and brand building? Let's put that on hold for 2 years because this is an expensive strategy always, right? So that's what I like to say. We are way better, more efficient than we are at Coca-Cola for sure. It's still an expensive strategy if you want to reach like 100 million people. So should we put that on freeze? And I heard from that person, from this senior executive on an investment fund, are you crazy? Have you ever seen any big company that said what I really did well was optimizing performance media? That's what made me become this giant company. You need to set your fundamentals. You need to keep building the reason why people buy your product, whatever is product, service. You need to keep building. I take that, and I think it's great that you have venture capitalists thinking about that, knowing that the way I was saying before, marketing and brand building is part of the funnel for you to build a big company. But how are you going to do that if you all need to be cash conservative? And we know that is expensive task. So I would say two things. One, that's of course when creativity comes to play. There is no free lunch, so don't believe this idea. But it's a moment to really, you're going to gain more points if you can be more efficient via creativity. How are you going to be in the right points, betting on your right audience? But the second thing that I would say is that also understand it depends on what is the situation of your company, specifically about cash and how are your business fundamentals. But that's a moment to look back into your P&L, into the reason why people buy, why you buy, and thinking about what are your low-hanging fruits. What I would do is, what are, in general, we're going to need to look for what Prashant was saying. What is the easiest way to generate customer value? But I would say I would look for the cheapest ways in the moment. So if you have an audience that is smaller, but that's the cheapest for you, and I'm not talking about only being cheaper in terms of media, but like in general is the less expensive one, logistically speaking, is the easiest one for you to get. Those are the source of revenue that you need to go now. So think about how to go to. It doesn't have to be the largest, has to be the ones that you can really conquer right now without spending a lot. That is something that we need to take a look into now. So it's a moment where strategy comes a lot to play. We need to think about what we're going to be doing.
It's a very interesting point you make here about prioritizing your effort to do it right, rather than just spend time in what used to be organic reach and bottom of the funnel optimization that it got you to a particular place. If you're not able to elevate the conversation to mid to top of the funnel through brand building, especially in an environment where the customers are going to seek price to value equation in a much more discerning way, it becomes imperative that you spend time thinking about how you engage with customers and create that value. And it is, there is also a couple of comments in the thing about when the organic reach in social media is tanking. How do brands deal with it? How do they go back? And I think, Flavia, you touched upon it briefly in the comment you just made. Love Prashant to lean in and give his perspective on this conversation.
So I would like to, I mean, the organic reach is going down for a very correct reason, which is people have limited mind space, and every brand has got on to the social feed and stuff like that. So obviously they need to make it simple for people. Now, how do you then? So the key question then is, how do you reset that value exchange between your social content and between people? How do you make it more meaningful? How do you make it more relevant? So I would like to give you a few very specific recommendations. Number one is hyper relevance. So the way people are living our lives today, their lives today, the way people get media content, it's all data driven experience. It all is designed around hyper relevance. So think about how do you integrate hyper relevance in your in the content that you put out. Number one. Number two, and this is not new, but I think the creativity will always have a premium. So if your content cannot get, the virality factor has to be notched up a few orders above. So instead of doing 30 posts in a month, you want to do 4 posts, but hope that one of them really goes viral, at least reaches 10% of your people because of its viral power. So the premium on creativity is extremely high today, and that requires investment, that requires the right kind of people, that requires a certain experimentation mode. So a little bit of attitude change is needed in how businesses do social media. All right. The third dimension, I would say, that ultimately, how do you make whatever views you get on your social feed work harder? And there, the whole from communication to content to commerce loop can be architected in a more complete way. And I think social media platforms are also working towards that, and they are creating new tools that allows you to do that. I would also like you to relook at your influence architecture. And if you look at the book, it talks about how to architect your pyramid of influence in a very systematic and careful way, because ultimately it is the influencers, not the paid ones. Because when people talk about influencers, they forget that 95% of the influential people are not really KOLs and influencers who take payments. So how do you tap the influence pyramid in a powerful way? So, I mean, these are some of the things I can think of firsthand.
Awesome. We've got about 10 minutes or less than 10 minutes left, and I would like to actually ask both of you a couple of questions, right? And this kind of sums up a few points that the audience has raised. One is, how do you convince somebody to have plant-based meat through marketing? The questions around, in the age of community-led content creation and shopper entertainment and digital world, what are some changes that big organizations need to make? And the new social media algorithms make it harder to reach people. So there are common themes that are evolving. And I would like you to both take a couple of minutes and give a summary of what are the things individuals need to start, stop, continue doing in their respective roles and organizations that need to stop continuing doing in their way to go to market, that will help them be prepared over the end of the world scenario and into much deeper into the future as well. Flavia, why don't you go first?
I'll start by the end, and then you lead me to a different direction if you need. So thinking about start, stop, keep. I'll start by the keep as well. One thing that I've been talking more with an audience of entrepreneurs and startups and scaling up companies, I would say that one thing that in general, I'm being very generic here, of course, but in general, what I think entrepreneurs and not only founders, but people that are in this kind of stage, they have and they need to keep is keep being brave. One thing that I see a lot that is way more than in any other big company. And it's not just a superficial like risk taker idea because you're taking money from others. It's this whole idea of in general take decisions without having all the variables, being brave to learn new things. That's unparalleled. I talk even way beyond NotCo. I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs also and Endeavor as well. And all of them, they have a one common trait, which is this idea of always learning, being humble to like, let me do a new framework for myself. Let's think about, you will never talk to an executive in a big company that knows so much about so many different areas, like that understands the main implications of HR, also finance, also legal. So this idea of like being broad on your set of knowledge, I think that's something definitely to keep in this startup environment. What should we start? I'll be more specific in this case because we talk a lot about that. So I was thinking that one thing that we need to start, and I think is a result of what I've been listening to in previous conversation before this one, exploring new media channels. So what I mentioned before of and exploring media that you don't even consider media. So think about the fortune cookie as an example, not as a media. I don't know if it's good or not, but thinking about this kind of thing. Everything can be a media. The idea that Prashant just said, like think about influence beyond influencers, right? It's about the idea of influencer. So explore that and use creativity on that. And that's something that probably you won't be able to outsource. Prashant knows better than I do the environment inside the agencies, but I would say that media, you do need to if you want to go out of the traditional, even considering the new media also traditional, you're gonna need to ideate together. You cannot just brief. And one thing to stop. I had more trouble thinking about that, but I would say so. I mean, we are in the right path, I say, but we should stop. It's not believing the hype, but it's more like being trapped by the hype. So why are we talking so much about is meta reality or not? Of course, it's a reality, but it's not like something out of this world. It's the way we consume things, it's the way we experience things. It's almost like, and I like what Prashant said before, is almost like somebody was asking me, do you think online banking is a thing? Yeah, it's a thing. It's not the thing. Of course, the way we consume is going to be more and more in this metaverse that is even weird for me having a 12 years old to call it a metaverse. That is my kid's life. It's not a new universe. It's what he does when he gets out of school. That's what he does. He plays, he thinks about his avatar all the time, he talks to his friends online. So it is, let's stop, let's resisting this urge of naming everything and talking only about the superficial side of it. It's all about consumer psychology. At the end, it's all about like understanding people. We're talking about people. Never forget that. So let's try to stop like too much guided by the hype and have the real conversations. That's what I would say.
Thank you, Flavia. Prashant, you got a couple of minutes.
So, well, I would add on to what Flavia said. I think it all goes back. Whenever a business person is stuck, a marketing person is stuck, they must go back to that one word, which is empathy. Empathy is the God particle of society. Empathy is the God particle of businesses. And in business, marketing is the custodian of customer empathy. And when you have empathy with your customers, you discover unseen insights in the deepest recesses of your subconscious mind. So go back to the people, try to understand better what they really want, your customers, your prospects, your consumers. When you have empathy, you when you understand the whys, you can conceive why nots. So it triggers imagination. When you have empathy with your customers, you find ways that others haven't found to connect with them. When you have empathy, you invent new products, the you do R&D that sort of makes sense to people. So all return in any business is ultimately return on empathy, and is the only way to have a sustainable margin advantage. So whenever in doubt, go back to the people and understand them better. All right. So I mean, that is at a very, because it was a short answer to what actually can be a very long book
A
in
separate
itself.
conversation, totally. This has been amazing conversation with both of you, Flavia and Prashant. Um, it's a nice summary here when you talk about going into an environment where it is becoming more uncertain, more inflationary, the pressure on the business will be more intense, and the hype of that intensity will also be pretty intense. So, how do you uh, go back to basics? How do you look at the fundamentals? Obviously, there is a very good book out there called Made in Future. Get your hands on it, and you'll get a lot of practical tips to navigate this. But I think the two things that I will wrap up on is empathy being a very critical element of winning the customers. When I worked on P&G 25 years ago, we were all asked to go and visit the bathrooms of the customers to see how they store their bottles and how they use the bottles. And going and being with the customer on the ground rather than reading a report on them will be a super critical thing. And Flavia, you mentioned about be brave and be comfortable with the uncomfortable and explore new ways of doing things to actually win the customers as you move forward. I enjoyed this panel. I hope the audience found value in this. We are at 11:30, so I'm going to pass it back to Fira to actually do the conclusion.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ranga, Prashant, and Flavia, for such a great session. I think we've had a lot of questions in the group chat itself. And as a marketer myself, I've gotten so much out of this talk. And it's really inspiring to hear amazing stories and thoughts on how marketing has changed itself. So, if any of you in the audience would like to share this session with your colleagues, friends, or family who missed out on the session today, the recording of it will be available on our YouTube page. And if you would like to reach out to us or either to Insider or even to purchase Prashant's book itself, feel free to scan the QR codes on the screen. And once again, everyone, thank you for tuning in. Thanks, Ranga. Thanks, Prashant. Thanks, Flavias, for being here. And thank you, Insider, for sponsoring this event.
And
Thank you,
Frida, if
everyone.
there are any unanswered questions, we are happy to take it
Yeah.
offline and answer that. So, all right.
Okay, yes. So if anyone, has any additional questions, feel free to send it to us and we'll send it over to the speakers.
Yes.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Very much.
Have a great day. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a
Pleasure.
good day. Yes. Thanks, Flavia. Thanks, Prashant.